The forest is a place where secrets seem to hang in the air, carried on the breeze like whispers. As a park ranger, I've spent years among the trees, patrolling the trails, keeping an eye out for campers, and ensuring the land remains untamed and protected. The woods have a stillness to them, a quiet that almost feels alive, as if the trees themselves are watching. In all those years, I thought I had seen everything nature could show me. But then something began to change. It started subtly. A glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but gone before I could turn my head. I figured it was just a shadow cast by the tall pines. But then it happened again, and again. Over the weeks, I started to feel a presence whenever I entered a certain part of the forest, an area far from the usual hiking trails, deeper into the wilderness where few people venture. It wasn't menacing, but it was there, as real as the sun. The first time I felt it, I was making my way along a ridge, checking for any signs of erosion. The forest was its usual self, quiet except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the wind. But then, there it was, a sense that I wasn't alone. I stopped in my tracks, listening, waiting. My eyes scanned the trees, but there was nothing to see, at least at first. And then, a shape. Big, broad, almost blending into the shadows between the trees. It stood motionless, but I could feel it watching me. My heart raced, but not out of fear. It was something else. A strange, steady curiosity. Then, just as quietly as it had appeared, the figure melted back into the woods. I waited for the sound of snapping branches, the rustle of leaves underfoot, but there was nothing. The forest swallowed it whole, leaving me alone again. After that day, I returned to the ridge more often. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen, or thought I had seen. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to be the ranger who started talking about shadows in the woods. But deep down, I knew something unusual was happening. The presence became familiar. Every time I hiked that section, I could feel it nearby, like a ghost in the trees. I never saw it clearly again, but I would catch glimpses. A flash of fur, the curve of a broad shoulder disappearing into the undergrowth. Weeks passed, and I began to notice more subtle signs. Fresh footprints in the soft earth, with toes that were too human-like. Large branches bent and woven together, forming arches and structures that couldn't have been made by wind or falling trees. These things were deliberate, crafted. It was as though something or someone was marking the space, leaving signs that only I seemed to notice. I tried not to think too much about what it could be. Bigfoot. The word felt strange in my head, like something out of a campfire story. But there was no denying it. What I had encountered wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a person. It was something in between, something beyond the usual wilderness inhabitants. And it was aware of me. We never met face to face. There were no conversations, no gestures, but we communicated in other ways. I began to leave small offerings when I hiked the ridge, smooth stones, feathers I found along the trail, once even a pocket knife I had carried for years. I would leave them in places where I had seen the signs, at the base of trees or near the twisted branch structures. The next time I returned, the objects would be gone, replaced by other things. Pine cones carefully arranged in patterns, stones stacked on top of one another, sometimes a strip of bark that had been peeled and coiled like a ribbon. There was an understanding between us, though I could never explain it. I was never afraid, though I knew the creature, whatever it was, could easily overpower me if it wanted to. But it never showed aggression, only a quiet, almost playful curiosity. As the months went on, the woods became even more familiar to me, like a second home. I knew where I could expect to feel the presence, and I knew when it was gone. On days when I felt its absence, the forest seemed emptier, quieter in a way that made me miss it. When it was near, though I could never see it, I felt reassured, as though I wasn't truly alone in these deep woods. One winter evening, after a fresh snowfall, I hiked up to the ridge again. The snow was untouched, pristine. I had brought a small stone I had found by the river, smooth and round, perfect for the kind of exchanges we'd been having. As I placed it at the base of a large cedar tree, I noticed something odd. A trail of footprints in the snow, large and wide, leading away into the woods. They were unmistakable, the same kind I had seen in the mud before, but more distinct in the fresh snow. I followed them for a while, but they led deeper into the forest than I dared to go with night falling. I stood at the edge of the trees, staring into the darkness. Somewhere beyond, I knew it was watching me. I felt the familiar presence, not menacing, but steady. I left the ridge that evening with a sense of peace. We would never meet. I knew that now. The connection we had was something beyond words, something that didn't need to be seen to be understood. I don't think I'll ever fully explain what happened during those months, and maybe that's for the best. Some things are meant to remain a mystery, like the woods themselves, ancient, secretive, and full of life we can barely comprehend. But every now and then, when I'm out on patrol, I catch a glimpse of movement in the trees, a flash of fur, and I smile, knowing that somewhere out there my silent companion is still watching. It all started as a fun adventure, just two friends exploring the world, eager to start our vlogging journey. For weeks, my friend and I had talked about how cool it would be to create videos about cryptids, those mysterious creatures that people swear they've seen, yet no one can prove exist. We loved watching cryptid shows and browsing the internet for stories. So when we heard about the Beast Man of Tonkararen, it seemed like the perfect subject for our first video. We had read about the Tonkararen Tunnel, an ancient structure in Kumamoto, Japan, and how some people believed a strange creature lived in the area. This creature, known as the Beast Man of Tonkararen, was said to be massive, with gorilla-like features. There were stories of encounters, but none were quite as vivid as the one from 2004. According to reports, a couple sitting on a bench near the park had an unexpected run-in with the cryptid. The creature had appeared out of nowhere, looming behind them, and then just as quickly disappeared back into the hedge. It sounded like the kind of story that would get people's attention. We thought it would make a fantastic first video. Imagine starting our vlogging channel with an actual cryptid encounter. But of course, a part of us never expected to see anything. We thought it would just be a fun adventure and an excuse to explore a cool location. So, we packed our gear, cameras, microphones, and tripods, and set off on our trip. Kumamoto was beautiful. We couldn't help but take in the quiet beauty of the countryside, with its lush greenery and towering trees. It felt serene, almost too peaceful for a place that was supposedly home to a beastly creature. But as we approached the Tonkararen Tunnel, the atmosphere shifted. There was something about the area that felt different, an eerie stillness, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. We found a spot near the tunnel that resembled the bench from the 2004 story. We set up our cameras, recording everything. We started talking about the legend of the Beast Man, explaining the details we had researched. It felt exciting to be standing in the exact place where the encounter had supposedly taken place. For a while, nothing happened. We joked around, making light of the situation, talking to the camera about how cryptid hunts often end up with nothing more than good footage of nature. But then, things changed. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a movement in the hedge behind us. It was subtle at first, like the shifting of branches in the wind. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a small animal. But then the rustling grew louder. My heart started to race. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination, but my friend must have noticed it too, because we both turned around at the same time. At first, we saw nothing but the thick greenery of the hedge, but then something emerged, something big. It was like a shadow at first, a dark shape moving through the leaves. And then, in an instant, it was there, standing before us. The creature was enormous, just like the reports had said. It had the muscular body of a gorilla, but there was something unnatural about it. I froze, not sure what to do. My brain was trying to process what I was seeing. Was this real? Could this really be the beastman of Tonkararin? It stood there, its eyes fixed on us. Then, without warning, it moved. It extended its arms, reaching toward us. My friend and I both jumped to our feet, instinctively backing away. I don't remember if I screamed, but I do remember feeling a surge of panic. We had talked about cryptids for years, joked about them, but in that moment, there was nothing funny about it. The creature took a step toward us, and then another. It wasn't moving fast, but its size and the way it moved made it seem even more menacing. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck to the ground. Then the creature stopped. It crouched down, lowering itself into the hedge, and in a blink, it was gone. We stood there, frozen in place, staring at the spot where the beastman had disappeared. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had we really seen it? Was this real? My friend broke the silence. Did you get it on camera? I snapped out of my daze and checked the footage. Somehow, despite the shock, the camera had kept rolling the whole time. We had captured everything: the movement in the hedge, the creature's appearance, and its slow, menacing advance. We packed up our gear quickly after that, both of us still in shock. The rest of the trip was a blur. We barely spoke, each of us lost in our thoughts. When we got back home, we watched the footage again. It was just as terrifying as we remembered. The creature was real, or at least it looked real in the video. We had actual proof of the beastman of Tonkararin. But then came the doubt. Should we post this? Should we share this with the world? A part of me wanted to, of course. It would be the perfect way to start our vlogging channel. Instant fame. But another part of me hesitated. What if people didn't believe us? What if they thought it was fake? Or worse, what if it was real and we had just captured evidence of something dangerous? In the end, we sat there for hours, staring at the video, trying to decide what to do. It was a sunny afternoon in 1959 when I found myself flying over the dense forests of the Congo. As a colonel in the Belgian Air Force, I had flown many missions, but that day was different. My helicopter hummed steadily, slicing through the humid air as we returned to Kamina Air Base in the Katanga region. The thick jungle stretched out beneath us, a sea of green and brown with no sign of human life for miles. The world below seemed so still and peaceful, but I was about to witness something that would shake me to my core. As we flew over a particularly dense area of forest, something unusual caught my eye. At first, it was just a movement in the canopy, something that didn't seem to belong. I squinted, trying to get a better look. What I saw next made my heart race. There, moving slowly between the trees, was the largest snake I had ever seen. The creature was massive. It must have been at least 50 feet long, its body as thick as a tree trunk, and its scales shimmering in the sunlight. The snake was dark green and brown on top, blending in perfectly with the forest floor below. Its underside, however, was a lighter, almost whitish color, making it stand out against the shadows of the jungle. Its head was enormous, triangular in shape, measuring about 2 feet wide and 3 feet long, giving it an appearance that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. I flew lower, trying to get a better view of this incredible creature. It moved with slow, deliberate motions, winding its body through the undergrowth as if it owned the jungle. There was something ancient about the way it moved, as though it had been here long before humans had ever set foot in these forests. The sheer size of the snake was unlike anything I had ever encountered or even imagined. As I continued to observe it, I realized just how dangerous this creature could be. A snake of that size could easily take down a large animal, or even a human, without much effort. Its head alone was large enough to swallow a man whole. I felt a chill as I imagined what it must be like to face such a creature on the ground, where there would be no escape. The snake's scales shimmered as it moved through the undergrowth, its body rippling with strength. I noticed how the sunlight played off its skin, casting shadows and highlights that made it nearly invisible from certain angles. It was as if the jungle itself had given birth to this monstrous serpent, hiding it from the eyes of the world for so long. As I flew closer, the snake seemed to sense my presence. Its head lifted slightly, turning towards the sound of the helicopter. For a moment, I thought it might strike, but it simply stared, its black eyes cold and unmoving. There was no fear in its gaze, only a quiet, terrifying confidence. This was its domain, and I was merely an intruder. The snake lowered its head and continued its slow journey through the jungle, disappearing once again into the sea of green. I hovered there for a moment longer, my heart still pounding, before finally turning the helicopter back towards the airbase. As we flew away, I couldn't shake the image of that massive snake from my mind. I had heard stories of giant serpents living in the remote jungles of Africa, but I had never believed them. Cryptids, they called them. Creatures that were rumored to exist but had never been proven. But now, I knew the truth. I had seen it with my own eyes. Back at the airbase, I shared my story with my fellow officers, but many of them were skeptical. A 50-foot snake? It sounded like something out of a nightmare, not reality. But I knew what I had seen. The creature was real, and it was out there, hidden deep in the heart of the Congo. For days after the sighting, I couldn't stop thinking about the snake. Its size, its power, the way it moved, everything about it was unlike any animal I had ever encountered. I began to wonder how such a creature could remain hidden for so long. The jungles of the Congo were vast and largely unexplored, but surely something this massive would have been spotted before. And yet, as far as I knew, no one had ever reported seeing a snake of this size. I was on vacation in a small coastal town, far from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. This town wasn't a well-known tourist destination, and that's what drew me in, the chance to explore something untouched by the masses. One afternoon, I stumbled upon a quaint local museum. From the outside, it didn't look like much. A small, weathered building, painted in muted colors, with a wooden sign swinging gently in the ocean breeze. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to go inside. The museum's interior was dimly lit, and the air smelled faintly of salt and old wood. The exhibits were a jumble of curiosities and relics from the town's long history with the sea. There were old fishing nets, tools used by whalers, and bottles that had been pulled from the depths. A dusty sign at the entrance read, "Maritime Wonders and Legends." I wandered slowly, taking in the odd collection. It was peaceful here, away from the noise of the outside world. My eyes were drawn to an exhibit tucked away in the back, one that looked older than the others. The sign in front of the display read, "Fiji Mermaid." I had heard the name before, but it was mostly associated with hoaxes and traveling shows from centuries ago. P.T. Barnum had famously exhibited a mermaid that turned out to be nothing more than a mummified monkey's head sewn onto a fish's body. It was a grotesque spectacle designed to attract crowds eager to see a mythical creature. I didn't expect much more from this display. I assumed it would be another cheap reproduction, like so many that had surfaced over the years. But something about this one was different. The mermaid was encased in a glass box, lying on a bed of faded velvet. It was small, no more than 3 feet long, and its body was twisted as if frozen mid-swim. Its face was gaunt, almost skeletal, with sharp cheekbones and hollow eye sockets that seemed too large for its head. Thin strands of hair clung to its scalp, and its mouth was slightly open, revealing a row of tiny, pointed teeth. The torso resembled that of a human, but the arms were too long, ending in delicate, webbed fingers. Below the waist, the body tapered into a fish's tail, covered in dry, flaky scales that had long since lost their shine. The mermaid's skin was withered and gray, as if it had spent centuries underwater before being pulled to the surface. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. Something about it felt real. It didn't have the stitched-together look of a hoax. The proportions were wrong, yes, but not in a way that suggested it had been pieced together from different animals. It looked like it had once been alive, and that disturbed me. A small plaque next to the glass offered a brief explanation. It mentioned the famous Fiji Mermaid that had been shown around the United States in the mid-1800s, an exhibit that drew both fascination and skepticism. The plaque explained that this particular specimen had been found washed up on the shore near the town decades ago, and no one had been able to explain its origin. Some believed it to be a hoax, while others swore it was proof of something ancient and forgotten. As I stood there, staring at the mermaid, I thought about the history of these creatures in folklore. Mermaids had been part of human imagination for centuries, appearing in myths and legends across cultures. In some stories, they were beautiful and benevolent, guiding sailors to safety. In others, they were dangerous sirens, luring men to their deaths with their haunting songs. But in all those tales, mermaids had always been portrayed as otherworldly, neither human nor animal, but something in between. I remembered reading that, in earlier centuries, mermaids were often explained away as sightings of dugongs or manatees. These marine mammals, with their large round bodies and almost human-like faces, might have inspired the legends. Then, there were the unfortunate cases of people born with cyranemelia, a rare congenital disorder in which the legs are fused together, giving the appearance of a mermaid's tail. In times past, these individuals were often mistaken for mythical creatures or were displayed as sideshow curiosities. But this thing in front of me didn't resemble any dugong or manatee, and it certainly didn't look like it had been made from human remains. The longer I stared, the more I felt a creeping unease. Later that evening, I did some research on the Fiji Mermaid. I read about how it had captivated audiences during its heyday, even though most people knew it wasn't real. The original exhibit had been lost in a fire, but replicas and imitations had surfaced in museums and sideshows around the world. Some were as grotesque as Barnum's creation, while others were more refined, designed to look like the real thing. I never should have opened that box. It was a Friday afternoon after school, and I was walking home when I spotted an old wooden box half buried in the dirt by the side of the road. It looked ancient, covered in scratches and strange carvings. I felt curious, like it was calling me, so I picked it up and brought it home without thinking twice. That night, something changed. I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing whispers, but there was no one in my room. The next day, my parents noticed something was wrong. I wasn't acting like myself. I would stare at the walls for hours, lost in thoughts that weren't my own. I felt heavy, like something dark was inside me, controlling my every move. At school, my friends said I was acting weird. I became distant, snapping at people for no reason, and I started having strange dreams about shadows that followed me. My parents grew more and more worried as days passed, especially when I started speaking in a voice that wasn't mine. They tried everything, doctors, counselors, but nothing worked. Finally, they reached out to a shaman, a healer they had heard about from a friend. The shaman came to our house one evening. I remember the strange smell of herbs filling the room and the feeling of cold air swirling around me as the shaman performed rituals I didn't understand. He told my parents the box was cursed, something called a Deok Box, and that I had been possessed by a restless spirit trapped inside. The shaman worked for hours, chanting and using sacred tools to drive the spirit out of me. I felt as though something dark was being pulled from deep within me, and I collapsed to the ground. After what felt like forever, I finally felt free. The box was gone. The spirit was gone. And slowly I started to feel like myself again. My parents were relieved, and life returned to normal. But I still think about that box sometimes, and the shadows that whispered to me in the night.